Just a few years ago, renters were bidding against each other just to secure a basic apartment, terrified of hearing the property manager say, "Apply now before it's gone." Today, those same renters are waking up to desperate emails from leasing offices offering 2 months of free rent, waived deposits, and a plea to please just come take a look. We are currently watching the aftermath of an extraordinary wave of multifamily supply that peaked heavily around 2024-2025. Hundreds of thousands of new apartments are now hitting markets where the renter demand is significantly weaker than landlords initially expected. And the pressure on landlords is getting harder to ignore. Over in Austin, one major dataset shows asking rents plummeting by nearly 6%. Down in Sarasota, an unbelievable 81.8% of properties are handing out concessions just to get people in the door. Meanwhile, San Antonio just posted the highest vacancies rate among the 50 largest multifamily markets. And Fort Myers is quietly running the deepest effective concession rate in the entire country. The old belief that rents would just keep climbing is breaking down fast, and renters are finally getting some leverage back. In this top 10, we are counting down the U.S. Cities where rent is falling, vacancy is climbing, and landlords are suddenly working a lot harder to convince you to sign a lease. Tell me down in the comments which city on this list surprises you the most. Number 10, Jacksonville, Florida. Landlord weakness does not always look like a theatrical crash on day one. Sometimes, a market quietly loses its old edge, and Jacksonville is the perfect place to watch that power dynamic fundamentally shift. A rent drop by itself can easily be dismissed as a normal seasonal correction, but when rent falls while the vacancy rate climbs into double digits, you know property owners are getting extremely nervous. Realtor.com reported that Jacksonville's median asking rent slid 3.3% year over year by January 2026, landing at $1,458. During that exact same window, the rental vacancy rate climbed from 8.6% in 2024 to an uncomfortable 10.1% in 2025. That double-digit threshold is exactly why Realtor.com classified Jacksonville as a renter-friendly market for the second straight year. Zillow confirmed this reality by placing Jacksonville among the 4 large metros with the highest vacancy rates at the end of 2025, grouping it with heavyweights like Austin and San Antonio. The root cause of this stress is a relentless supply cycle. From mid-2023 through early 2025, annual new apartment deliveries equaled about 7% of the city's total inventory, which is a massive addition for any regional market to absorb quickly. The hangover from that construction wave is persisting, with Apartments.com projecting that Jacksonville's multifamily vacancy would still sit near 11.7% into the second quarter of 2026. When developers dump that much product onto the streets, a property manager can no longer assume a vacant unit will refill in a week. Renters suddenly have the luxury of touring multiple buildings, comparing incentives, and waiting for the absolute best deal to surface. Properties that refuse to adjust their pricing risk, sitting empty for months. What is actually collapsing in Jacksonville is not the entire regional economy, but rather the landlord's pricing power and their ability to bluff at the leasing desk. Florida's still attracting people, but in Jacksonville, renters now have a lot more room to negotiate. And as we move further down the Florida coast, we find another major city where the migration boom simply stopped covering up for overconfident developers. Number 9, Tampa, Florida. The Florida growth story did not completely disappear, but it is certainly no longer strong enough to absorb every new luxury apartment building developers throw at it. Tampa captures the exact moment when the pandemic-era rental magic started to fade. Apartments.com reported that Tampa's average rent was down 2.5% year over year in April 2026. While that percentage alone does not make Tampa the steepest faller on our list, the real story is what pushed those prices down in a city that used to feel completely invincible. By the end of 2025, Zillow had already identified Tampa as one of the highest vacancy major rental markets in the country. This happened because the city was built on a highly optimistic migration narrative that suddenly hit the brakes. Axios noted that Tampa Bay's domestic in-migration slowed sharply, dropping from roughly 35,000 net newcomers in 2023 to only about 10,000 in 2024. A market can easily handle a mountain of new apartment construction, if out-of-state remote workers keep pouring in every single week. But Tampa's problem is that the apartment supply stayed incredibly aggressive while the migration side cooled off. Institutional property advisors projected that Tampa would post its slowest annual population growth since 2011, noting that net absorption had already weakened in the second half of 2025. Even as demand softened, heavy construction completions were still threatening specific submarkets like Central Tampa and New Tampa East Pasco County throughout 2026. Landlords who priced their units based on peak migration levels are now sitting on empty inventory, realizing they have to lower their expectations just to get a lease signed. What is actually collapsing here is the assumption that Florida demand is a bottomless well that will absorb everything at any price point. The city is still growing, but it is deeply overpriced for the pace of demand it is capturing today. That same tension is playing out further north, where the banking capital of the South is quietly masking its own rental panic. Number 8. Charlotte, North Carolina. A headline rent drop can occasionally look moderate on a chart, while the leasing offices on the ground are secretly in full-blown panic mode. Charlotte is the absolute perfect example of a city where the official rental rates completely understate how much leverage property managers have lost. According to the April 2026 report from Apartments.com, Charlotte's average rent was only down 2.2% year-over-year. But when you look past that modest sticker price reduction, the underlying data reveals a deeply stressed market. The vacancy rate sat at a highly uncomfortable 12.6%, and an astonishing 51.2% of all properties were offering concessions just to attract tenants. When more than half of a city's apartment buildings are actively sweetening the deal with move-in specials, those discounts are no longer just exceptions to the rule. They have essentially become the market standard. That concession share actually jumped 13.8 percentage points in a single year, proving that landlord confidence was deteriorating rapidly. The reason behind this aggressive discounting is a massive supply wall. Over a 3-year period, developers dumped 45,900 new rental units into Charlotte's market. For years, this city was one of the cleanest economic growth stories in the South, fueled by banking expansions, corporate relocations, and a steady influx of young white-collar professionals. Developers responded exactly as you would expect by building a seemingly endless wave of mid-rise apartments. But eventually, the pipeline simply outran the population growth. Even with decent lease-up activity, Charlotte properties are now forced to offer 1 month free or 2 months free just to keep their brand-new units from sitting empty, with both of those heavy discounts being nearly equal in popularity. What is actually collapsing Charlotte is not the city's overall economic relevance, but rather the lease-up confidence of its property owners. Landlords are fighting a desperate battle against new inventory, and renters are the ones walking away with the savings. And this exact same dynamic is unraveling another famous southern brand city just across the mountains. Number 7, Nashville, Tennessee. The brand stayed blazing hot, but the rental math simply broke. Nashville deserves this spot because its rental market weakness hits so much harder when you remember exactly how much blind optimism got priced into this city during the boom. This was not just a standard growth town. It was a globally recognized lifestyle market built on music, tourism, endless corporate relocations, and aggressive luxury apartment development. Investors treated it like an unstoppable money machine, but the reality on the ground in 2026 paints a very different picture. Realtor.com showed a sharp decline in Nashville's median asking rent, which fell 4.5% year-over-year to $1,471 in January 2026. Apartments.com also tracked a broad market softening, showing the citywide average rent down 2.9% that April. While different platforms measure different slices of the market, every major dataset points to the exact same conclusion. The vacancy data is even more revealing. Nashville's vacancy rate jumped from 8.5% in 2024 all the way to 11.1% in 2025, firmly cementing its status as a renter-friendly market. That massive 2.6 percentage point jump in empty units means that a market previously driven by out-of-state capital and heavy Airbnb speculation is suddenly struggling to find enough permanent residents to fill its high-end buildings. The seductive logic of the pandemic era convinced developers that If they just built another luxury complex, a highly paid transplant would inevitably show up to rent it. But as the post-pandemic surge lost its momentum, the properties that were underwritten with those inflated expectations began to bleed. When a city with this much cultural momentum posts double-digit vacancy rates, it proves that city identity alone cannot prop up unhinged rental prices forever. What is truly collapsing in Nashville is the investor expectation that boom-era pricing was a permanent new baseline. Landlords are now facing a very sobering reality check. But if you want to see exactly how far owners will go to bribe tenants, we have to head west to the mountains. Number 6. Denver, Colorado. In some markets, the sticker price is basically lying to you, because the listed rent is nowhere near the actual discount renters are receiving. Denver is one of the most powerful examples of this hidden collapse. The published rent is certainly falling, with Apartments.com reporting a 3.5% year-over-year decline in April 2026, and Apartment List data tracking a drop of nearly 5% that February. But the true depth of the landlord panic is exposed by the extreme lengths they are going to, just to get a signature on a lease. According to CoStar's Rent Pulse data, Denver posted a massive 4.0% effective concession rate in the first quarter of 2026. That means the actual rent collected by landlords is falling much harder than the headline numbers suggest, because they are heavily subsidizing leases behind the scenes. Denver spent years establishing itself as one of America's premier lifestyle rental markets, drawing in remote workers and tech professionals who were willing to pay a heavy premium for mountain views and outdoor culture. Assuming that high willingness to pay would last forever, the metro area added roughly 20,000 new apartment units in 2024 alone, expanding the total inventory by 5%. That pipeline overshot the actual demand so badly that by the first quarter of 2025, Denver's vacancy rate had reached 7%, marking a brutal 15-year high. Rents subsequently fell to their lowest levels since early 2022, and property managers started pushing incredibly aggressive incentives to stop the bleeding. We are not just talking about waived application fees. Local reporting highlighted leasing inducements ranging from $500 to $1,000 gift cards. And one luxury property even ran an absurd promotion offering a tenant-free rent for a year plus a $50,000 prize. You do not hand out a $50,000 prize if your building is leasing up effortlessly. What is actually collapsing in Denver is the effective rent and the total confidence of the property owners. And as extreme as that sounds, the hidden discounting gets even worse when we return to the Gulf Coast. Number 5. Fort Myers, Florida. Fort Myers is the absolute best city on this entire list to understand the concept of double discounting. It is one thing for a property manager to lower the asking rent on a public website. It is an entirely different level of distress when they lower the rent and then aggressively discount the real price again the moment you step inside the leasing office. Apartments.com actually ranked Fort Myers as the city with the largest year-over-year average rent decrease in its April 2026 report, plunging 3.7%. But that visible decline was just the tip of the iceberg. According to CoStar's Rent Pulse Index, Fort Myers was running a shocking 5.3% effective concession rate in the first quarter of 2026, which was the deepest hidden discount rate in the entire country. Fort Myers shows what happened when Southwest Florida kept building for boom-level demand that didn't hold up. During the peak migration years, developers heavily targeted this region, assuming that retirees, remote workers, and coastal lifestyle chasers would endlessly absorb new premium units. A Matthews Market report perfectly illustrated the buildup, noting a period where the region absorbed just 520 units while simultaneously delivering over 2,200, with another 6,700 still under construction at the time. By 2026, that supply imbalance had become impossible for landlords to hide. CoStar reported that Fort Myers entered the year with a devastating 25-year high vacancy rate, explicitly noting that asking rents were declining at a historic pace. This is why Fort Myers is such a critical piece of the national puzzle. A region can look perfectly healthy from the outside, with warm weather and a desirable coastal brand, while the landlords operating inside that market are getting absolutely crushed by poor timing. They delivered a mountain of product into a moment when renter demand was no longer elastic. What's weakening in Fort Myers is the rent landlords are actually collecting, along with the income those buildings were expected to generate. Landlords are paying renters to choose them, which is exactly what we are seeing unfold in the desert. Number 4. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix is one of the clearest examples of a rental market that expanded too aggressively during the boom. We are not looking at an abandoned desert town here. The regional economy is still highly active, but the idea that rents could just keep rising year after year has taken a serious hit. Phoenix attracted institutional buyers, build-to-rent developers, and remote workers from expensive coastal states, creating a frenzy that pushed property values and rents into the stratosphere. But developers did not stop building when the migration wave finally cooled off, and now they are paying the heavy price. By April 2026, Apartments.com showed Phoenix's average rent was down 3.3% year over year, while Apartment List tracked a decline of roughly 4% in February. And just like we saw in Florida, the vacancy metrics tell a much more painful story than the rent charts alone. Phoenix settled into a heavy 12% vacancy rate, creating an environment where supply heavily outpaced the immediate renter pool. Because of that imbalance, Apartments.com ranked Phoenix among the top 5 cities offering the most rent concessions in the entire country. The panic at the leasing desk is highly visible, with secondary reporting noting that at one point, over 54% of Phoenix rentals were offering at least 1 month free. CoStar confirmed the severity of these incentives, listing Phoenix with a substantial 3.8% effective concession rate. Since, in the first quarter of 2026, this means the gap between what landlords wish they were charging and what they are actually collecting is widening by the month. A 3 to 4% loss in effective revenue across a massive apartment complex is financially devastating for investors who bought into the market, assuming rents would only ever go up. CoStar analysts actually called the Phoenix market a paradox because it remains a strong economic hub while simultaneously putting much more pricing pressure on property owners. What is truly collapsing in Phoenix is the underwriting math that fueled the 2022 construction boom. Rents are falling, but the situation is about to look even worse when we look at sheer vacancy stress. Number 3. Sarasota, Florida. Sarasota is one of the most important cities on this list because it proves a brutal reality of the 2026 housing market. The scariest rental markets for investors are not always the ones with the largest visible rent drops. Sometimes, they are the ones where the hidden desperation is overwhelmingly massive. On paper, Sarasota's headline numbers do not look like a complete apocalypse. The average one-bedroom rent hovered around $1,760, with Apartments.com reporting a year-over-year rent drop of 2.9%. But the moment you look at the vacancy and concession data, you realize the sticker price is lying to you. Sarasota's vacancy rate climbed to a severe 17.4%. That means nearly 1 out of every 6 apartment units in the market is sitting completely unoccupied. According to CoStar, Sarasota actually began 2026 with its highest recorded multifamily vacancy rate since tracking began in the year 2000, because property managers cannot simply wait passively for tenants to appear in a market with that much empty space. They have completely surrendered their pricing power. An incredible 81.8% of properties in Sarasota were offering concessions in early 2026. When 4 out of 5 buildings are handing out incentives, the asking rent only tells part of the story, because the real deal is increasingly shaped by concessions. The most common concession in Sarasota was a staggering 2 months of free rent, with nearly 47% of all concession-offering properties utilizing that massive giveaway just to get a lease signed. Sarasota was supposed to be a permanent winner, fueled by endless Florida lifestyle demand and retirement migration. But the supply side ran entirely out of control, flooding the market with over 4,500 additional rental units in a single year, expanding the local inventory by more than 10%. What is actually collapsing in Sarasota is occupancy confidence and landlord bargaining power. But if you think a 17% vacancy rate is a nightmare, wait until you see the operational stress happening deep in the heart of Texas. Number 2. San Antonio, Texas. While another Texas city usually grabs all the national headlines for falling rents, San Antonio deserves the number 2 spot because it is arguably the most operationally stressed major rental market in America. If you want to see where vacancy stress is most visible, San Antonio is the clearest case. By April 2026, Apartments.com reported that San Antonio's average rent was down 3.5% year over year, with average rents down 5% since 2024 and nearly 10% since 2023. But the pricing pain is heavily overshadowed by the sheer volume of empty units. An Apartments.com concessions report pegged the city's vacancy rate at a severely elevated 15.8%. Even more alarming, the San Antonio Express News, citing CoStar data, reported a 15.7% vacancy rate in early 2026, officially crowning San Antonio as the market with the highest vacancy rate among the 50 largest multifamily markets in the United States, officially overtaking Austin for that unwanted title. This pressure is largely the result of a delayed hangover from the construction boom. Over 13,000 units entered the market in 2024 alone, pushing the 2-year delivery total to nearly 20,000 new apartments. Even though developers finally started pulling back, dropping new additions by 36% in 2025 with further cuts projected for 2026, the damage was already fully baked in. The market still had to digest the massive wave of buildings financed during the boom years, which caused overall occupancy to end 2025 at a dismal 88.2%. Landlords are responding exactly how you would expect when nearly 12% of their building is dark. Concessions climbed 2.3% year over year, reaching an average of $100 off rent per month by late 2025, with leasing offices throwing in weeks of free rent, waived application fees, reduced security deposits, and free parking just to secure a tenant. What is actually collapsing in San Antonio is the landlord's ability to control the leasing conversation. They're carrying far more inventory than the market can comfortably absorb, but the clearest overall rent reset is still waiting further north in Austin. Number 1, Austin, Texas. Austin is the clearest number 1 on this list. This is the city that completely defined the pandemic-era rent boom, and now it perfectly defines the aggressive rent reset of 2026. Austin is experiencing one of the sharpest rent declines in the entire country, driven by a massive delivery wave that fundamentally broke the leverage of every property owner in the metro area. Axios, utilizing apartment list data, reported that Austin suffered the largest metro rent decline in the country from February 2025 to February 2026, plunging an incredible 5.9%. Apartment List's own monthly recap framed the drop even deeper at 6.3%, while Apartments.com showed a 3.9% decline. Even though these platforms use slightly different methodologies, their combined message is unmistakable. Austin landlords have lost major pricing power. This historic price collapse is happening because Austin is dealing with a 13.5% vacancy rate, a direct result of developers overbuilding. In 2024, an astonishing 32,500 new units entered the market, followed by another 17,500 in 2025. Adding roughly 50,000 apartments in just 2 years turned one of America's hottest rental markets into a place where tenants suddenly have far more bargaining power. Zillow placed Austin among the large metros with the highest vacancy rates at the end of 2025. And that volume of vacant inventory pushed property managers into much more aggressive competition for renters. Almost 700 properties were actively offering concessions in 2026. Over 38% of those concessioning properties were advertising 1 month free, while nearly 25% were forced to offer 2 full months free. CoStar tracked a heavy 3.9% effective concession rate, proving that landlords are heavily bleeding revenue behind the scenes. During the boom, remote workers flooded the city, convincing investors that demand would roar forever. But Austin did not suddenly become a bad city. It simply built so much supply that renters never have to beg for a unit again. What is actually collapsing in Austin is all 4 pillars of the market simultaneously: the asking rent, the effective rent, landlord pricing power, and the inflated investor expectations of the boom years. When you step back, the pattern is hard to miss. These cities didn't suddenly become places nobody wants to live. They built too much, too fast, for a rental boom that didn't last forever. Now rents are slipping, vacancy is rising, And landlords are offering deals renters barely saw a few years ago. For tenants, that can mean more choices, more negotiating power, and a little breathing room in markets that used to feel completely unforgiving. Thanks for watching, and I hope this breakdown was useful. Tell me which city surprised you most, and subscribe for more deep dive countdowns like this.